Hotep. It's your brother Beniti Marie. Back with another post slash class. What we're going to talk about today are some aspects of the Egyptian mysteries, understanding the Egyptian deities, what they represent, um, how that also applies to when working Egyptian magic. Obviously, you hear, you know, with the big thing being Egypt, you hear a lot of people talking about Egyptian history, but nobody really tying in any of the magical aspects of Egypt, which is probably the most critical, the most important things. When you're reading the Coming Forth by Day, um, the utterances that you see in the Coming Forth by Day, which basically was a book explaining to the adept the process that took place when one would pass through the underworld, or the transition from death to eternal life, going through the nine gates, etc., going through the hall of the 42 judges, the weighing of the heart on the scale of the feather, which we know as dealing with the principles of Ma'at, which is a manifestation of the connection to the seven hermetic principles of Tahuti, because you need both to fully grasp the full meaning of what these things are trying to say. This is also where you get your judgment concept. You're going to find out, again, most of the concepts that you get in what we know as Egyptology today, what we know of, is where Christianity pretty much grafted everything that it uses in their practices. And the whole judgment thing comes from that story of the Hall of the 42 Judges, one being judged based on how they lived their life here on earth. Now, in the religious sense, in dealing with monotheism, it got a little fanatical. Whereas in the Egyptian writings, it clearly states you get judged for your intentions, your actions, and your deeds, not for how religious or holy you portrayed yourself to be. So it was a different aspect. When we apply the Egyptian deities or the Egyptian mystery system when working spiritual and magic, one has to educate themselves on what each deity represents, the symbolism that's tied into it, the archetype energy that it births within the subconscious mind. And this, again, dictates the path or the pattern that one needs to work towards in working with these deities. For an example, one deity, as we've talked about a multitude of times, that's completely misunderstood. We'll go through some of them here, and we'll focus in on what they actually represent. Okay. First, to dispel the myth, we'll start for an example with the deity Seth, or Set, or some say Sutuk, just basically depending on what aspect, culture you're coming with the pronunciation of the name. But here's an excerpt. This is a book called Ancient Egypt, an illustrated reference to the myths, religion, pyramids, and temples of the lands of the pharaohs. Good book, very detailed, gets into some of the basics, but this is one of the better translations, especially when you're trying to understand who and what the deity Set was. Set was Osiris's brother, and as such was a member of the Heliopoetan family of gods and goddesses. He was associated with chaos, this is important to understand, infertility, and the desert, but in certain geographical areas, and this is why I pointed this particular translation out, which this is what they don't focus on, such as the northeastern delta. And at certain times in Egyptian history, he was highly honored. There were kings of the 19th and 20th dynasties, for example, whose names derived from him, such as Seti and Seth Nakti. His worship recognized that chaos had to be acknowledged before order could be seen to exist. Okay, let's say that again. His worship recognized and acknowledged that chaos had to be acknowledged before order could be seen to exist. And that's why I keep telling everybody, before you can have order, you have to have chaos first. Everything is birthed out of the darkness and the chaos. Okay? And then it goes on to say, and though the desert was an arid and dangerous place, it was also an enormous value to the Egyptians, particularly for its natural resources, such as gold, amethyst, and turquoise. This god Set had an important cult center at Nakada in Upper Egypt. Tradition maintained this had been the place of his violent birth from the sky goddess Nut. Seth was represented in the form of an animal that cannot be conclusively identified, and it had a long curved snout, pricked flat-topped ears, and a canine body and a forked tail. He was sometimes shown as a man with this animal's head. It is possible that this animal may have belonged to the species that is now extinct, but is more likely to have been fabricated to produce a disconcerting appearance for a deity associated with trouble and barrenness. Seth could also be represented as a pig, a donkey, or a hippopotamus. All right. Now let's establish this. When dealing with the Egyptian deities, some people again get caught up in the little aspect. Like for an example, this is talking about Seth being associated with that type of deity. Ra was associated with the ram. Anubis was associated with the black jackal dog of the dead. Now, thing that remains to be seen here, or that people overlook, these masks were symbols or symbolic of the type of nature they had. As it said here, that this was more, as far as the example, Set, the type of animal, and because he was identified, it was chaotic. And this was something that was exaggerated to represent the energy that tied into Set. So let's get out of our minds that the Egyptian deities were some half man, half human beings walking around with animal heads. Each one of those animals that you see all the deities with, and they all are symbolized with an animal and an element in creation, especially the upper deities, like such as Shu, Tefnut, Ra. These were all deities that were symbolic with a lot of areas of certain aspects of creation. Now, what is Nut? The sky. You're getting your none the chaotic waters. You're getting your creation stories in symbols and representations of what these deities actually represented. But somehow along the line, again, this has gotten twisted, where now people are literally worshiping these deities. It's insane. And it's become external now. So now we're back to square one. We are not focusing in on what the key elements are and the key archetype principles that these energies of these deities represent. Now back to Egyptian magic. I use the deity Set. We can go through all of them, but we're not going to do that. You see what these deities symbolize and the energy that they represent. That same concept you would utilize when you're invoking these deities and working with certain elements. So again, as I said before in the past, if I was doing a ritual to invoke the energy for intellect, knowledge, and wisdom, I would focus in on the deity Tahuti. If I was looking for more of a warrior energy to clear my paths, I would invoke the presence of the deity Ra. If I needed, some clarity, or I needed to bring myself to a mind state where my mind needed to be rejuvenated. If I needed some type of healing, I would not only access to Huti, I would focus in, especially for healing aspects, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, I would focus in on the deity Kansu. The list goes on and on and on. you would focus in on the energy of what the deities represented. Now, back to Set real quick. What's powerful about Set is if I really wanted to take that leap spiritually, especially when working high levels of Egyptian magic, that's when I would want to tap into the pure chaos energy of Set. Now, let's dispel the myth, because unfortunately nowadays you have got a lot of information out there where people correlate Set to Satan. And this is dealing with your modern day Luciferians who have inadvertently connected the two, and who don't understand, people who look at it from that perspective don't understand what the deity Set represents, because then they start using the religious explanations and interpretations, and we're back to not understanding the varying degrees of vibration of the seven hermetic principles of Tahuti. We're now separating something that is the same, that's vibrational frequency from the same source. And that's why the seven hermetic principles are so important. What appears to be the same existing simultaneously, what appears to be different existing simultaneously actually is the same, which deals with the doctrine of polarity and vibration and rhythm. So when you look at the deity Set and Horus, who are linked together because of the battles that they've had, people don't understand what that's really symbolic of and what that really represents. It's one and the same thing. It's just showing you both sides and both aspects of what the nature of that energy represents. One side was the aspect of how intellect and free will is utilized. Horus represented staying in line with what was established, what laws were written, and the guidelines and the criteria that guided those laws. That's what Horus represented. Now, on the flip side, what Set really represents in our nature and our subconscious mind is the complete opposite of that. Set represents not wanting to conform to the norm, not wanting to conform to the rules, the regulations, and the guidelines. Rather, Set wanted to take full control of his destiny and didn't want to be subservient or not come under anything or anyone. How many of us have that mentality in very aspects of our life? When you say things like, I want to own my own business and I don't want to work for nobody, that's the Setian mentality. When you say things like, I want to be, successful, and you're determined to go any length to get to that success, that's a Setian mentality. That's a mentality that doesn't accept the norm, accepts the fact that they are divine, accepts the fact that they are a deity and have deity-like qualities and want to raise themselves up as a deity. Whereas the Horus mentality was more of the conformist, the one that actually wanted to try to stay in line with the order that was established. So, no, they are varying, vibrational degrees of the same exact thing. There's no different. And this is how you work with these magical principles if you want to fully invoke and activate the energy of these spirits. So it's not just about reading about them. What Egyptian magic is, when they use the word utterances, for an example, in the coming forth by day, and most people read the coming forth by day and they have no idea what the hell they're reading. And some people look at it as very religious or a religious text, and it's not religious at all. It deals highly with metaphysics, and it gives a lot of explanations of things that are definitely going to transpire and take place.